Mr. Nelson, and then Kurt Ahrens. Mr. Nelson.
Thanks so much, Barry Nelson, NRDC. I'm also speaking today on behalf of the Bay Institute. We've been working very closely on recommendations that we've submitted to you folks in the past. The last time I testified, I said that I think it makes particular sense for you to try to clarify the long-term goal established by the Delta Reform Act, and then talk about how you're going to apply it in the case of this one narrow policy. I still think that makes sense. I think we are making some progress in that direction. And I'd like to touch on 5 issues, some issues that we've raised, some issues that others have raised. First is that we do believe that the appropriate metric is a reduction in total volume, not just percentage. I've mentioned that before. There are really 3 reasons for that that I think are particularly relevant to you. The first is that the Delta Stewardship Council is building on the work of the Delta Vision process. The Delta Vision process very clearly identified that we have a system that's dramatically over-appropriated today. And I think that's where the reduction in reliance language came from. I think it's important for you to keep your eye on that ball. We think, and that was not a discussion of percentages of use, it was a discussion of volume. So we do think that given the origin of this policy to reduce reliance, the findings of Delta Vision are relevant. Second, the overall focus of the Delta Reform Act is focusing on improving, as we see it, the physical reliability and predictability of Delta supplies, not increasing volumetric exports. And we think that also suggests that there's nothing incompatible between increasing physical reliability, predictability, and over the long term producing volumetric reductions. Third, and I think this is probably the most directly relevant one. This is from section 85086. C1 of the Delta Reform Act, and it's the section that requires the state board to make the flow criteria determinations, and it says very clearly that those flow criteria are being developed for the purpose of informing planning decisions for the Delta Plan and the BDCP. So the state board prepared those flow criteria for you to inform this decision, and now, that was not a binding regulatory decision. That was a scientific finding. But the scientific finding that came from the state board was that in order to achieve the co-equal goals, in order to restore the Bay Delta system, we need to find a way to reduce volumetrically the amount of water we divert from that system. So we do think that's the correct metric. And we'd urge you to keep that a focus on that. Now, again, that's the long-term goal, and we think you should establish the long-term goal clearly, and then separately discuss how you apply it in the narrow case, and it really is a very narrow case that you're talking about in this case. That's our first recommendation. Second, there's been discussion of how your policy specifically with regard to transfers as covered actions would apply to retail agencies and wholesale agencies, whether the right metric is the regional level or the agency level. The answer is the agency level. But the example that Martha walked you through that talked about a wholesaler and how you measure progress at the wholesale level, if that transfer is a transfer undertaken by the wholesaler, then the measurement is at that level, and the wholesaler is a wholesale agency. If it's serving a region, then the agency is serving the region. That's the right metric. So if a wholesale agency is applying for a transfer, then you look at the region that wholesale agency is serving. But if one agency is applying for a transfer, and that agency happens to be a good actor, and there are 3 other bad actors next door, so as a region, that region is not making progress, but the agency proposing the action is making progress, then if you solely measure at the regional level, you punish the bad actors and potentially you punish the good actors and potentially reward bad actors. So by measuring at the agency level, you solve that problem. Because where it's a wholesale agency you measure it as a region because that agency is serving a region. If the action is proposed by an individual agency, you look at the performance of that individual agency so that they're not punished as a result of the actions of their neighbors or rewarded as a result of the actions of their neighbors. That's the second point. Third, you've heard a lot of comments today from folks who talk about the fact, folks in the watershed, who reflect on the fact that they have fewer options to reduce reliance on the Delta than some other agencies. It's absolutely true. Now, I know from talking with Mr. Frienerini that your proposal is designed to capture that the management plans prepared by those agencies that are captured here reflect the options available to those agencies. But I still think it's worth thinking about adding some clarifying language because I know that nuance is there, but it's clearly not getting through the folks. So I think it's worth thinking about adding some language that simply reflects the fact that some agencies have more options than other agencies do to reduce reliance. That's not fundamentally changing the approach. It's simply clarifying that for a lot of folks who clearly don't understand the nuance of that proposal. Two more specific suggestions with regard to ag urban. You've had two suggestions that give us concern. One is a suggestion from ag urban that there should be another pathway to achieve compliance, and that pathway would be compliance with other laws, achieving the conservation requirement in 7X7, preparing ag and urban management plans. And I think that's simply the wrong approach. You don't measure compliance with this act, the Delta Reform Act, by whether agencies are in compliance with other parts of the California Water Code. We need a metric that clearly applies to reducing reliance, and that metric is not whether you're in compliance with other legislative requirements. The last issue I want to touch on is this baseline issue, and I'm looking at the new ag urban sentence at the end of the first paragraph, really for the first time, and it leaves me quite confused. What you've heard from folks is that you don't want moving goalposts, and I fear that unintentionally the new language at the end of paragraph 1 that's been suggested by ag urban would result in a perpetually moving goalpost. Frankly, what do I think? I think the metric for reduced reliance is the baseline established when the act was passed and signed. This is a long-term goal of reducing reliance. It's not going to be achieved in a single year, and I don't think it can be simply measured in a moment. And I may be misunderstanding how that language would be implemented, and I'm not sure I fully understand it. But here's my concern. If I'm an agency contemplating a transfer and I am using more water volumetrically than I used in the past, and I'm using more water in percentage terms from the Delta than I used in the past, but I'm still implementing some conservation programs, then if the baseline is what my use would be in the absence of those conservation programs at any particular moment, then that baseline language from ag urban could be read as suggesting that if I'm doing any conservation activities at all, and I'm volumetrically increasing my use of Delta water, and in percentage terms I'm still dramatically increasing my use of Delta water, that somehow I'd still be reducing reliance on the Delta. Now, maybe that language is intended to be applied in some other way, but I sure don't understand it. That sounds to me like a continually moving goalpost, and that the baseline would be, am I doing anything to increase efficiency at whatever moment I happen to be proposing that action? So it wouldn't be measuring against some meaningful moment in time so that we don't have a moving goalpost. Those are our 5 recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Don.
Yeah, Barry, just back to the previous point on the clarifying language to address in Delta and upper watershed users. Did you have any language that you might offer relative to that?
I have to go take a look. We did offer some language a couple of meetings ago. I'll go take a look at it. I don't recall if we got to that issue. I don't think it's fundamentally changing the policy.
Right, but that's what I heard you say, that clarifying.
That the council recognizes that different water users have different tools. I'll take a look. I don't recall if our...
Well, it seems to me that not seems to be, but the last meeting, and maybe it's connected, Mr. Becerra said using some of the success stories, using examples on page 94, Martha, and maybe expanding upon that or making some equivalency connection to those success stories being, relevant. It seemed to maybe go to some of that point about how you could, achieve this in different manners and recognizing the distinctions in some cases. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay, and I don't know what we're going to do with that or not, but I mean that was only a suggestion from the audience. But that might go to some of the language and may help, because I know there was some follow-up correspondence that's related to that as well. So, okay, good. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.